Hello, this is Chris. This is Chris Hott, and I just completed the series of 23 videos called "What Did Meher Baba Really Teach?" And I'm still thinking about what I'm going to do next. You know, if I'm going to start a new series, I haven't thought of what that'll be, but I thought of this talk to give because this topic, when I first heard this, it was life-changing. It really was. It was really like a big quantum shift in my mind. And there were other things that later came along to add to it, but this was really a big. So this comes from. For me, it came from the philosopher Berkeley, although he's the first one who ever stated this. George Berkeley was an Anglican priest, but before he was a priest, he wrote some philosophical papers that are very important. He wrote them when he was very young, 26. I think when he was at Trinity College in Dublin, something like that. He was Irish. And he had been keeping up on all the writing of the Enlightenment, like Descartes and Locke, and he noticed a big problem. Actually, the problem had always existed in philosophy, but Berkeley was the first to really pick it out. And address it head on. Now, this is my version. I have several versions of Berkeley's writing, but this one by every man is called Philosophical Works, including the works on vision. So this is pretty exhaustive of his major works, but there's one they don't mention on the cover, which I think is just as important as his paper on vision. It's a one called De Motu, which is this is the only place where I was able to find this essay De Motu, which means on motion, and it's really about energy. And boy, did that have an influence on me also. But that's in here in English, and normally you find it only in Latin because in the Enlightenment, writers would often write in Latin because it was universally used in academics all over Europe. So if you wrote in Latin, they could read it in Germany because they were taught to read Latin. They could read it in France. They could read it in England. So that was very useful. It was like a common language. But Berkeley's more famous works are written in English because he was Irish, of course. However, the main book that I'm always looking at, which is his, I think it's called his Principles of Human Understanding, I believe. Yes. He wrote in 1710. Now, something about English writing in 1710 is, first of all, it was very, very beautiful and excellent, but many words that they used then are now obsolete. So I luckily had a very, very good thesis advisor, because my thesis was on Berkeley in part, and he was from Stanford, and he was brilliant, and he was able to explain to me what words meant, and we had a good relationship. I would ask him straight out. So examples are a phrase that they had back then was in philosophy was sensible qualities. Sensible. And so I went to him and I said, what are sensible qualities? And he said, well, they're qualities of sense, like color is from your sense of sight, and sound is a quality of sense. They're sensible, meaning you can perceive them with your senses. And he said, don't think it means reasonable, because that's another meaning for the word sensible. So that really helped. Straight up. Oh, they're not sensible. They're not reasonable qualities. They're sense qualities. That's what we would call them today. Or today we might call them sense data or something. That would be more modern. But I like the term qualities because data isn't really how we experience a soprano singing a classical song. We don't hear data. A scientist might be able to tease out a whole lot of data out of a recording of that soprano, but that's not what we hear. We hear qualities, the quality of the pitch and the volume and all that. So I like the word sensible qualities, but I know that people won't know what I mean if I say that. And another thing that's important is to understand Berkeley's use of the word perception, which was normal at the time. Every philosopher in English would have used the word perception like Berkeley did. But today it has a different, more narrow meaning. And this is very important for understanding Berkeley or any of my writing, because I'm always talking about perception. I've written 2 books that have the word perception in the title, and I mean it in its original classical sense like Berkeley used it. And perception today kind of either is so narrowly defined, it either means eyesight or it just means like perceiving with your 5 senses, the 5 senses, hearing. But that's not the way it was in 1710. Originally, from the Latin, the word just means gather or take. So it just means taking experience of anything that you can be conscious of. Any quality that you can be aware of, we say, and you are aware of it, we say you are perceiving. So if I am, having a hallucination from drugs, maybe I took LSD, and that's not really sense perception. But it's still perception because I am consciously aware of it. And it's been even said that the word perception is very close to just the word consciousness, except consciousness doesn't have a verb form. We don't conscious something. But that's what perception means. It means if we did have a verb form for conscious, that's what perception meant. And that's how I use the word. So if I can perceive my I might be imagining something, or I perceive my dream at night. I perceive pain. I perceive when I'm going over mathematical concepts, which totally don't have any sensible qualities at all. I still perceive them as I'm thinking about them. I perceive my thoughts. I perceive my internal monologue. Okay, so you get that. It's a very broad word. And if you take away that word and you narrow that word to just mean the 5 senses, then you're losing a huge part of the dialogue of philosophy, at least the philosophy of consciousness. And so you've really robbed philosophers, and philosophers are very scared to use the word like I do. I'm not, because I just explain it. I'm using it in its original classical form, closer to its original meaning from the Latin percipere. Which just means to take or gather experience. Okay, so that's all I needed to. It seems boring when I do that, when I have to say something about words. But it sure is important. I mean, there was more than one person completely, wouldn't even read my first book because they thought I was using the word perception wrong. And then I had to do some research. I knew I wasn't, but I had to find out, what happened? And I know the history of how it changed. And it's not a good thing. We need a word like perception. Okay. We essentially mean, when we say perceive, we mean experience. Okay, I experience that. Okay? No one would deny that I experienced my dream or I experienced pain. So, it's like that. But let's move on now. Now, the thing that I was so life-changing that Berkeley said was, he said and famously said this. So a few things that he said are by people who've studied philosophy of the Enlightenment. They know that he's famous for these statements, and a lot of people don't understand them. That's why I'm making this video. So I want to make it clear what he meant. He said, "We only perceive our own ideas." So I went to my professor, and I said, "Hey, Berkeley says we only perceive our own ideas." And then he who had actually published on Berkeley, he understood Berkeley very well. He said, "Why, is that controversial?" Well, that was quite an answer. So I didn't know enough to know whether it was or not. So I just digested his response. And now, in a way, there's people who argue with it, but they're only arguing because they didn't understand what Berkeley was saying. Now I'm going to explain what it is, because I explained it to my daughter over the phone the other day, and she knows, she's followed a lot of this I've shared with her over the years, but she's still, it took a bit to get it across, and then she got it and said, "Well, you needed to say that. That helped. Now I get it." Okay, so I'll do that. Unfortunately, I don't have my easel here anymore. It'd be kind of good to draw these things, but I'll do it without doing that. Berkeley has no charts, he's just writing, and so you have to visualize it or think about it. Okay, so what does it mean to say we only perceive our own ideas? Okay, so I'll say the first thing that I told my daughter to try to explain this, and I will say that she really kind of didn't like this. It didn't make sense. So let's say I look out my window and there's a fire engine out there, because there's a fire in the apartment building, a small fire, and there's a fire engine out, and I see the fire engine. Now, normally, I just go, okay, there's a fire engine, okay? I believe that I'm perceiving a fire engine, and when I say, well, where's the fire engine, I go, there, my point, my experience of it, my perception. And I feel like my perception of the fire engine, well, it's the fire engine, but it's not quite like that. There's two things, in a way, in normally in what people normally think. There's two things. There's the fire engine, the object of my experience, and there is my experience of it. Now, you might go, "Oh, you're just trying to be clever with language or something." No, I'm not. But let me explain. So, the red, fire engines are red. Some are yellow now, but let's just say this is a red fire engine. And color red we think is painted onto the fire engine, but it's really not. It's a little different than that. And the physical reality is that the fire engine receives light from a light source, generally the sun, because it's outside. And the sunlight comes down, hits on the fire engine, it reflects off the fire engine, and goes to our eyes. And now it doesn't go through your eyes like a window into your head. The light goes not very far, and then it is the frequency of the of the radiation is converted to a positive and negative electrical signal by my body, and that signal, so it's not the light itself, it's a signal representing it. It goes down my optic nerve to my brain, and there the experience of color, according to modern theory, the experience of color is created out of that particular number of hertz of the cycle that it receives to the optic nerve. So it's not even interpreting light as red, it's interpreting a mathematical number of cycles per second, so a ratio of time and space. It's converting to the red experience. So, and this happens with all five of our senses, all right? I won't go over them, but it's the same thing. It's the same with sound. That's why they say that if there's nobody to hear a tree fall in a forest, does it make a sound? And the answer is, in physics, the answer is no, it doesn't really make a sound, it makes a vibration. And that goes to your eardrum, wiggles your eardrum, the same as like this eyesight, the color red. It goes to your brain, and your brain converts that particular ratio of cycles per second into such a certain pitch and sound, which sounds like a tree falling. So there's no sound in the forest that isn't converted from the sound waves into a sound. It's funny. Sound waves aren't really sound waves. They're really air. They're rarely air vibrations. That's what they are. And I'm just quoting the physics. This isn't even philosophy. This is just regular biology or plus physics that you learn in high school. So if the color isn't necessarily out there, it happens in you, and the sound doesn't really happen out there, it happens in you, and you go over all of your five senses, then what's the fire engine out there? Because to just start describing how you experience it, you're describing a representation of it that's created by your mind or brain. You're not really describing it. So that's the sense in which there's a fire engine, and then there's your experience of the fire engine. But you only experience your own experience of the fire engine. There's no way you can experience the fire engine, because that fire engine doesn't ever get in your head. My daughter gets really mad when I say that, because it's like I'm being insulting, like insinuating she thinks it goes in her head. No, I'm just saying it doesn't go in your head. So it's not, the fire engine's not in there. Only thing you experience is that which is your experience. And where is your experience? Well, according to the modern way of looking at things, it happens in your brain. Your experience takes place in your brain. So it's in your head. So what's outside our head? Well, here's the problem. Even if you were to imagine all these things that I just said about sound waves and the optic nerve, the light radiation, and the cycles and the vibrations, you're going to be picturing, imagining all these things. Well, where did you get the ability to imagine anything? From your experience. So all these things are a projection of stuff that's going on in your own head, and you're really projecting it outside of yourself onto the cause. So it's going to be a lot like its effect in your head, but you don't have any reason to think it is. Black and white and gray are colors. And the only thing you can picture is colors. Now, that sounds funny. What about lines? Well, lines have to be a color or you can't experience them. Or the collision of two colors when they come together. You could say the border. But that is the experience of this color and this color. The line is just kind of a conceptual difference, where they meet. So if color is something that's entirely created inside you, then what are you picturing? Don't think that just because you're picturing maybe you could picture a gray fire engine, that you're escaping the fact that that's happening in your head. And you're projecting it outside as the cause, as like the effect. But the same would be true even if you think you're picturing like frequencies, because most people, when they go, oh, vibration, they're going to picture something vibrating. What? And it's going to have a color. And so that's not in you, okay? So it's very funny, because when we talk about the mathematical states of the external world, people start thinking about, it's energy, and then they start picturing energy. And this is where things like, black holes come from, and wormholes, and all kinds of things in the new physics. It's just out of the imagination. That's our source for our imaginings of the external cause. But we have no access to anything outside of our experience. So what Berkeley really means when he says you only experience your own ideas, the word ideas, we wouldn't use this anymore. We would just say your own experience. But at that time, an idea, they had this idea like a mind, the contents of a mind is an idea, and an idea can only be in a mind. And so that was the kind of way they talked back then. But they just meant any experience. How could there be experience outside of mind? That's kind of what they mean. There can't be. It wouldn't be experience. It'd be something else. So we have no access to the world independent and outside of our mind, our thoughts, our experience. So instead of saying you only perceive your own ideas, let's just say you only experience your own experience. I mean, you don't experience my experience. You might experience something that you imagine is like my experience, or we might both be having an experience of the same things, theoretically, but you only have access to your experience, so you can never really know that. A whole lot of interesting things arise. First of all, just a skepticism of, wait a minute, how do we know there is an external world? Well, how do we know there is a fire engine? And if there is a fire engine out there, well, thinking about what it looks like is a projection of its effect in me onto the cause. So that has no rationality at all. So, and we can't picture number, and plus number is purely mental. It is. There's no numbers in the world. You can't go to the store and buy a jar of 2 ounces of numbers. Numbers are conceptual. So, is there something physical out there? Maybe, but if you go to imagine it, it's a projection of its effect in you onto it. So, you either followed what I said or you didn't, but that's what's meant by you only perceive your own ideas. Thank you. I'll see you in the next talk. Bye-bye.